Hello and welcome to the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host Mike.
And I'm your co-host Alex.
And today we are covering the third entry into the Umbrella Academy, which is Hotel Oblivion.
It's the third and, as of now, final volume.
Yeah, it's final-ish. I did see Free Comic Book Day this year is going to have an Umbrella Academy thing.
There is, yeah. As time is recording, there will be a new Umbrella Academy story, yes, for Free Comic Book Day 2023. And then, depending on when you're listening to this, there may actually be movement on this hypothetical Umbrella Academy 4, which actually does play into my view of Volume 3 now that I've reread it. But until
it's going to have to, yeah.
Well, I mean, until that's actually in a solicitation, and gosh, I might not even believe it until it's like actually in my pull box at my shop. I won't believe that there's an actual Volume 4 until I see at least one issue physically in my hands. It's kind of like some of those, anytime they announce any kind of IP movie 4, 5, 6 years out, like even seeing a trailer is enough. Like I got to be in the theater for it to start for me to believe it's actually gonna be there.
I know at this point it's like, oh really? Is Superman in 2025? We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, that one I feel pretty good about. They'll probably make Superman. Whether or not, how good it'll be, a different story. But I feel they'll get that one off the ground. They'll make that one. But I unfortunately, Way and Bob, with this specific property, I mean, they haven't earned the benefit of the doubt. I mean, it took 10 years between the end of Dallas, and Hotel Oblivion, and it isn't like they didn't have ideas. Because at the end of Dallas, there is the preview page, which is the cover for issue 1, which is the plate and the silverware with the roach on it.
Oh yeah, so he's got an idea of where it's going, and that if you don't believe that after reading Volume 3,
definitely,
I mean, but almost to a fault here. And so let's get into the
100%, yeah.
Because okay, so I think. I don't know if it's ever been overtly stated on the podcast, but in general, I don't talk about things I don't like. I like being positive, and I don't like doing forced or fake positivity. Mm-hmm. So if there's something I don't like, I typically just avoid interacting with it, and I don't bring it up in conversation, and I just leave it alone. That being said, I did not dislike this book, but my thoughts on it were nothing about this book was bad. But it all kind of added up to a nothing burger. And I'm trying to figure out why it was. And what I came to was, I think this feels like the first 7 issues of an ongoing series, which is very different than the first 2 volumes. This one should have continued numbering. When they pick this story up again, it should absolutely be issue number 8. It should not be a new series, because they opened all kinds of stories and didn't resolve most of them.
Hardly any of them. Yeah. Oh no, definitely. And I think I mentioned, we a couple times on going even back to the 0 episode that, I was fairly disappointed. When this came out, there was a lot of hype for it, a lot of anticipation for it, because the first 2 volumes were I think generally well received, and especially because people didn't really know Gerard Way as a comic book writer. So it was still new when Apocalypse Week came out, and people were like, "Whoa, this is like actually good." We underestimate this guy. Like I think both you and I mentioned we had, and then they followed it up with Dallas, which I think is the most fun arc.
Yes,
and then there's this nearly 10-year gap to Hotel Oblivion, and you at some point you put it on a shelf, like, well, listen, that's never going to come out, so I can stop thinking about Umbrella Academy. It's got 2 volumes, that's great, and that's it. There's nothing more. And then it actually does come out, which is, one of those incredibly rare things when there's such a long gap, especially one that's like unintended. It wasn't like they finished Dallas and like, listen, it wasn't like Saga. We're like, listen, we're going to take a break for a while. It is indefinite, but we are coming back. And of course, that was supposed to be like a year or so, and it being 3.5 years, but it did come back. When they finished Dallas, it wasn't like we're taking a break here. We'll be back in a little bit. It was like, there's going to be another series, and then it never came. And so at some point, you just write it off as this is never coming back, and I'm fine with it. So when it actually does come back, it's like, it's kind of a miracle book to be resurrected like that, because there's kind of so few that actually do. Because I guess at some point as a creator, I would have to assume that even if you love the book you're working on and love people you're working with, at some point you get so far from it, right? You get so far from it, like, well, I mean, we can't go back to it now, because
which I would dare call, at risk of alcohol poisoning for anyone playing a drinking game.
Yeah,
a certain Nick Spencer Image comic.
Yeah.
That we have referenced many times. Because there's no way it can come back now. It's just not. There's no audience.
Exactly, and in specific regard to someone like Nick Spencer, is part of the reason that Morning Glories got delayed and it never got back to it is because he all of a sudden had a billion other things to do. He went on over to Marvel and started writing Amazing Spider-Man, and then he was given Secret Empire. Like, he was given a lot to do. So all of a sudden you get further away from your creator-owned project, not because you don't want to get back to it, because you have 1,000 other things you're doing. You got all these other projects that have now, that one presumes you're making a lot more money if you're working for Marvel, maybe not a lot more money, but still you have for hire work. And so you're further and further away from that story you left off. And at some point it doesn't make sense to come back to it. With Way and Ba, I mean, again, they don't have the craziest amount of work, but Gerard Way did have another life. He was doing other things. He was busy writing some other comics, being a musician, doing all that. And then it said eventually he got, he went over to DC, and they said he curated that Young Animal line for a few years. He was kind of the head of that office, putting together kind of his own little cohesive kind of corner of the DC universe of kind of the weird stuff. So, all that happened in between finishing Dallas and eventually getting Hotel Oblivion published. So it does come back, and then there's anticipation of like, yes, we're back here, we're back in this world, we're back with these characters. And I guess there's
no story arc here.
It didn't land because
this is a runway for a longer story.
Well, it seems like it's a runway, but I don't think it actually is. I think this is them. This is them being like thinking they're really, really clever, because the thing about Hotel Oblivion.
That's interesting, because I was trying not to project a motive on the writer. It's hard not to.
Well, exactly. I can't ever think that, because the story is so fragmented. When it starts off, essentially every character is doing their own thing, and eventually, they all coalesce, and you realize that they're all different parts of the same story. The problem is, for me, when I was reading it initially, and when I went back to it again, I really remembered what I disliked about it was that most of those fragments of stories I didn't care about. Like, those parts I didn't care about. And so when they came together, it was like, okay, well, I didn't care about them separately, and I definitely don't care about them together. And the parts that I rereading it now for this discussion, the parts that I found myself enjoying were actually the parts that I had completely forgotten about. So like when back in the Zero episode, when I'm talking about, how this hypothetical volume 4 is supposed to be called Sparrow Academy. And I mentioned, listen, I know that the Sparrow Academy, or a version of that, an idea of that, was introduced in season 3 of the Netflix show. I had completely forgotten that they were introduced in volume 3. Like,
they're not named, right?
Well, of course, yeah. So and so part of that is now having a little more hindsight. You see them; they're dressed in red, and there's one close up of like a lapel insignia, which is a bird. And so, if you have
that's the cover of issue 6 or 7,
if you have the knowledge now, that's meant to be the Sparrow Academy, and you can kind of deduce now, thanks to the Netflix show, a little bit of what that's supposed to be. I think you can deduce that when you're reading it as well. But I had no memory of that.
Okay,
I had no memory whatsoever.
Well, it's inconsequential, and it's okay. Yeah. So here's the thing. I'm with you. So, number 1 is off in this adventure in space, which is
him and 2. So Luther and Diego are off
1 and 2 are off in space, doing essentially nothing. Like, they're pushing buttons and floating around, which is hilarious to be out in space on a story that goes nowhere. They're traveling literally to nowhere. Number 5, his side quest, which he taps what's
Allison
her name for?
Allison.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That feels like the crossover material. Like, if you read Dark Knight's Metal, that's the Gotham Resistance storyline, that you pick up in the side books. Like, that's Green Arrow's little side story of like, oh, we need this thing to do the quest. Here's a 3-issue offshoot of that.
Sure,
but it's not really part of the. That's what it feels like. So it feels like a side quest in kind of the worst way. Klaus, I think, has the most interesting standalone arc of him being drugged up and abused, and him breaking free, but it contributes nothing to the story.
Yeah. Although it does have, I think, my funniest moment this year is after he ODs, he comes back and they're at the hospital and 5 rushes in. It's like, what did I miss? And he's like, well, Klaus overdosed. And then he pulls out a sheet of paper and he starts reading it. Like an intervention, and which I thought was hilarious. But you're right. It is interesting. But yeah, it has nothing to do. Ultimately, nothing to do. All it does is it allows everyone to be, or it allows Klaus to be with his family when they then go to the end of the story, which he had nothing to do with other than he overdosed somewhere over here and they brought him back to the hospital so he could be. Yeah. So
and it's
not even tangentially related.
I think this is the roughest part for me. Is I still don't feel like I know these characters that well, that you can just tell me this is what they're doing and make it interesting. Now, I'm wondering if this is part of the Netflix effect, because I have not watched the show beyond the first episode. But at this point, as a reader, you never really get an introduction or deep dive. Everything you've learned about the characters is from their interaction with each other and how the story advances for 12 issues. That's it. That's like a couple hours of reading. That's all the depth that I have on 7 characters. And it just doesn't, I don't have a strong enough foundation. I don't feel like I'm very well acquainted with any one of these characters. So you can't just tell me 1 and 2 are off in space and have it be interesting to me.
Oh, and I agree.
And I wonder if at this point, 10 years later, after having seen the show, he felt like people know these characters pretty well. Now I can just go do this. Like, are they meant to be a shared experience? Well,
now I'm trying to remember now. I think Hotel Oblivion actually came out before the show.
Before any of the show. Okay.
Yeah, I was
thinking, I was reading, and by the way,
I think it premiered in 2019.
My favorite part of the book was Jeff Lemire's introduction, which I don't know if you got that in your trade. Great letter. He's he writes great letters in the back of his books. I love when he does a forward. And I think he was filming, he was around the filming of the show while this was coming out or being written. So there was something simultaneous about, but either way. Okay. So it's not the type of contamination that I thought it was.
Yeah. So Hotel Oblivion #1 was released in October 2018, and it ran through June 2019. And I believe the show premiered early 2019. So it was in production as this was being probably finished and then published.
Right. But again, that still pokes a hole in my theory of like he was assuming the fan base knew these characters really well because you spent 20 hours of a show with them.
But I do think what you said was true specific to Klaus as to why that's interesting, because you actually got to see him use his powers. Now, yes, he's using it to get high and scam people out of their money, but you actually get to see him use his ability there outside of being a quote unquote superhero, which is why I like that. That is most interesting. Again, nothing to do with the overall story of this book, but also the little bit we saw with Allison when she goes and confronts her ex-husband, and we get this backstory of did she use her power to make him fall in love with him? She clearly has convinced herself she didn't, but maybe she did and she doesn't know. But her ex-husband sure thinks that and resents her for it. It's why they're not together anymore and why she can't see her daughter and things like that. So I liked seeing them kind of outside of this like these missions and the superhero work, obviously with the exception of Five is, he's an assassin. He's going to do his thing. So that's why I liked seeing that bit of Klaus and that bit of Allison. But again, those character beats and those character kind of mini portraits have nothing to do whatsoever, like you see Allison.
It'd be great if they did.
Oh,
right?
It's
like, and I think he was trying to leave all of these threads to weave them together into something at the end.
And so, but I don't know if those threads are what he's weaving in, because the thread that comes in, because the one storyline we didn't mention was the magician and like Obscura, the two villains who are trying to escape the hotel. So the magician, for those that maybe don't remember, that he was the bad guy that they stopped in the original Free Comic Book Day issue, which is in the back of volume 1,
right?
Where he killed a version of Allison, a version of the rumor that she had manifested because she was telling lies about where she was spending her time. So he gets sent to Hotel Oblivion, which we find out is this prison that their father, that Reginald Hargreaves, set up, which I guess is somewhere in space or whatnot. But we spend time with them in this prison as he's trying to break out with like a baby to save, I guess. But like, I don't care about any of that. And of course, what happens there is that leads to this mass breakout of all these villains, which are all the villains that I guess the Umbrella Academy put away through their history, but we never saw any of that.
I know. And it's like, that. And can you imagine it telling a Flash story?
Yeah.
Where the whole rogues gallery breaks out, but you've never met them before.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it all has to wrap up in one issue.
And it's something that we talked about back in the first, when we talked about Apocalypse Suite, about how there is a version of this book where the story is actually the Umbrella Academy, what their adventures were. There's a version of this that's just them going on missions and doing things like that. That is not the story they were telling in Apocalypse Suite. They're telling the aftermath of that, and it's really about how their lives are screwed up as people because they did these things. It's not about the specifics of they beat this bad guy this one time or whatever it was. We didn't see those stories. And yet we get to volume 3 and all of their rogues that they defeated to come out there, and we don't know who any of them are. We don't know what any of their motivation is against the Umbrella Academy, except for the fact that, well, they lost to them because they're the bad guys. They're villains,
Right.
And so,
which is really shallow, really superficial.
Absolutely.
Like a children's book.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
or a Marvel movie.
we're following this Perseus character who we don't even know really, his father is like that. I guess that's how he knows about it. Five and Allison are investigating him, and they find the televator that goes to Hotel Oblivion, and Luther and Diego aren't even involved in the story, but when they get to the place that they think they need to go in space, they find that is where Hotel Oblivion is. And so it's like they accidentally fall into the main story, and then everything comes together, and they have to defeat all their villains coming out. And I cared for so little of that. Like I said, I cared for those so little about those individual parts that when they came together, and as I was reading it, I remember the first time, the feeling I had of like, I know this stuff's going to come together somehow. Like I have enough trust in the creators that all these threads will come together. And for the most part, they did. It's just that because I didn't care about, and they didn't make me care about these individual threads, when they did come together, like you said, nothing burger, absolutely nothing there, and that's the part I remember, how fractured the story was, this mass breakout from this prison, Hotel Oblivion, and then the team coming together to defeat them. Like, I had no interest in any of that, but that's the part that stuck with my mind, as opposed to like the little bit with Klaus and seeing him use his powers on the side there. I'd forgotten about Allison's little sojourn to her ex-husband. Again, completely forgot about what Vanya was doing and the setup of the Sparrow Academy and what you presume are like the other children who were born that day as them that Hargreaves didn't adopt. So all that set up for another story. Reading it now, I was like, well, this is really interesting. I want to follow those threads, and there are even, I had a note of this. There's like 2 pages of like a woman in Wisconsin wearing a shirt. I guess her name is Jennifer. It was like in volume 2.
Apropos of nothing. Yeah.
In volume 2, there were a couple pages where the Perseus character was introduced, that industrialist, the guy who's kind of the quote unquote villain of this book. He was introduced a couple pages in Dallas, just there because he knew he was going to come back to that. So we got this random woman, this random like middle-aged woman in Wisconsin working in a grocery store that, no connection to anything, but it's clear that, and that he's planting seeds for the next book, which again may or may not ever come, but so have no idea where that story is going to go. I have some idea of where the Sparrow Academy is going to go, and that is both informed a little bit by the Netflix show, but also just, putting kind of putting some context clues together. That they must be some of the other children that Hargreaves didn't adopt. So I was just going to say,
I actually had guesses. Based on just being a reader.
Well, and we see at the end when another group comes in, and the book ends with the other number one saying, "I'm number one." So it ends with them showing up in a superhero capacity, like the Umbrella Academy had done as children. And the more I think about that, the more I think that's vastly more interesting to me, because in this world that they're living in, like, the Umbrella Academy are not unknown. So if you were another one of these kids who were born on that day who wasn't adopted, at some point you develop powers, because I guess that's the main presumption.
Right. So that's the mechanic of the world.
You're growing up in this world, and you're seeing stories of the Umbrella Academy, of these 6 kids who got adopted by this eccentric billionaire who are doing all this hero stuff. So you have a connection to them, because you probably deduce, I was born on the same day, in the same manner. I have these powers manifest, and you're seeing all of this happen, in your world that you're not a part of. Why are they the superheroes? Why do they get adopted? Why are they doing all this stuff? And so I think there could be a natural tension there for a story dealing with the other kids. I think there was like 43 some odd children. That's what the story says. So we only see 7 that are our characters. So we got all these other ones they could go with. And I guess that is where they want to go with this 4th volume. So it's introduced here, but my mind reads that and think that's way more interesting than the thing I'm reading right now, which is them, again, trying to contain this mass breakout of this prison of all these characters that I don't care about, from a time in these characters' lives that I don't care about. I want to see them now. So
I think the trick is, I think the message here was like an Avengers movie or story where all the characters are scattered and they're dissonant and they always have this friction. But then this great obstacle comes up and they can only be the Avengers when there's, something to overcome, something to avenge. And they can all always band together for that. And, And of course they do. They all come together. And there's this huge emphasis on, oh, look at all the personal problems all these characters have. Yeah. But look, they came together and they did the thing. Yeah. And a couple problems here. One, those are out of balance in this story. 100%. There's 99% of the story is look how dysfunctional they are. 1% is look what they came together to accomplish. 2, you see. I guess what I like about, I'll start with my favorite thing. My favorite thing is them seeing the other team at the end. Now, when I saw that just in the book, my first thought was, oh, well, they unleashed this interdimensional prison. Perhaps this reckless billionaire opened more than he meant to, and this is a multiversal Umbrella Academy. That was my first guess, probably because of all the multiverse stuff happening in pop culture right now. Yeah. Then as I reread it, I was like, okay, well, there are these other children. Presumably that's what this religious cult that Vanya is being recruited into is. Yeah,
in Norway. Yeah. There's the red motif. So yeah, I think it's safe. Right. I think it's safe to assume now
and they're
that
all wearing the bird.
World.
Yeah, yes. The cult. Yeah. So they're all wearing the bird. But what we see is these people presumably had healthy parents or a good religious upbringing. Basically, they have all the abilities of our Umbrella Academy without the trauma and dysfunction.
I think that's a fair assessment. Yes.
And I think where the story has to go next then is to say, well, what can we do that they can't? Like, are we just inferior because we're all messed up? Or can messed up people still be heroes? Which has been the point of the Umbrella Academy all along, in my opinion. The problem is that's all stuff that finishes on the next page that doesn't exist. And that's unique to this volume, because volume 1, sure, there were a lot of things still moving at the end of the story, but the story of that volume had resolved. Dallas had been a complete story. This one, I guess they called it Hotel Oblivion as if that's the center of gravity. And that's the other thing. Vanya's kind of one of your main characters through the first volume. It's still an ensemble piece. 5 is very clearly the main character in the second one, and I've got no problem with that. I think that's the best way to do an ensemble piece, is pass the ball around. And you still touch on all the characters, but you have a center of gravity, and there was just no center of gravity here other than the hotel itself.
Exactly.
Every story we were reading was in orbit and coming closer to Hotel Oblivion, but which is it's a noun, but it's not a person, and it's not a thing we knew about.
And again, and at the time you're reading it, you don't know they're all circling that. You know, Diego,
but you see the artistry of it afterwards, which means he did do what he intended to do.
Yes, but I don't think he made it compelling. I think the difference between this and volume 2 is that in Dallas, while again the characters are still separate, you have 5 recruits, again 5 and Allison. That's a fun pair. Those are together, and then you have Diego, Luther, and Klaus, who end up in Vietnam and all that because they go back in time too far. But while they're separate, they all know they're trying to get to the Kennedy assassination. They all know they have to get to Dallas in 1963. So while they're all separate, they're all heading to the same point, and everyone's going to get there. In this volume, everyone's separate, and they don't know they're all heading to the same point.
Right.
Including the villains we're following, trying to break out of the hotel. Everyone is circling again. Yet the same sun. It's the same center, but they don't know they're in the same story, and neither does the reader. We don't have information either until it's finally there, and you see, oh, it does all click. And then again, for me, because I didn't care about the separate parts, I was like, oh, it all clicks, and I still don't care.
Right.
Like none of this moved me. None of this was really compelling. There are small moments that were compelling that I liked, but the overall threads, they didn't grab me in the same way, because I didn't know, even though I knew they would come together, because I didn't know what they're coming together to or why. I said I didn't engage with it in the way that I had, I think specifically in volume 2, when it has a similar-ish structure, kind of this separated, fractured structure here, and
I think it's just
not as effective.
Two sides of the same coin. It's one. It's like, here's a perfect execution, here's a less optimal one. That being said, we are in an extreme minority here. I Googled and could not find a bad review of Hotel Oblivion.
Really?
In fact, so I have comicwatch.com. They give it a 9.4 out of 10. Writing got a 9.5, storyline got a 9.5, art 9.5, color 9. I don't know why color gets the only slight here of half a point lower.
Well, it's because it's Nick Flaherty and not Dave Stewart. That's why they had to bring in a different
modernreviewer.com gave it a glowing review. The comiccircus.com glowing review. Comic Book Wire, very positive review. And it does, like, comicbookwire.com, they have like a pros, cons, and overall. And their only con that they listed is that the members of the Umbrella Academy feel slightly underrepresented at points. I'm like, slightly. Now, here, let me get to the part that I'm most conflicted in bringing up about the book. I think this storytelling and this size of this story pushes the bounds of Gabriel Ba's strengths. Now, what I'm used to seeing him depict is like Day Tripper, which is character centric.
Mm-hmm.
And he draws a really good character. He does, beautiful, like just beautiful sketches. However, when he has to put a lot of faces on the page, they are sometimes hard to tell apart. They lose some of their distinction. And this is not about skill. This is about style, just to be clear, because also my favorite artists all have that flaw.
Yeah.
If Jeff Lemire does a 12 character ensemble where he's drawing them all, like Royal City, you're going to be like,
they're all looking the same. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's like, he has to make one guy bald just to like help him stand out.
Yeah. So the detail is not going to go. It's not part of the style to have that in the art, to have that on the page. You're right. You're right.
And it was just because they're throwing so much stuff at us
Yeah.
And so I think,
especially at the end when the big battle is there.
right, when the big battle's there, and you have the Prison Break characters and all these villains that I don't know any of the villains.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I don't know that any artist could have really untangled the, you know, knotted Christmas ball of light storytelling that Gerard Way delivered here. Like, I mean, even if they were all really distinct and you can tell them apart, it's still just a lot of characters to juggle. What I mean, realistically, if you're following all the plot lines and you know each character's name as they appear on the page, what are we talking? 20, 25 characters in this book?
I mean, so we got our six family members. You have Grace the mother at 7.
You have the billionaire.
You have the billionaire Perseus. You have the detective.
You got the other billionaire that number 1 and 2 go to, and his assistants.
You have the guys in space. You know, you have
you got the religious leader.
That's right, in Paris.
Then you have the people torturing or abusing Klaus.
Yeah, the Mothers of Agony, the bike gang. You have the guys who are escaping, are 2 main guys that are escaping Hotel Oblivion. You know, so yeah, I mean,
so even if we limit that to 2, you're
looking at about at least a dozen or so, a dozen and a half.
That's
that have specific storylines that are all part of the narrative here. It's just there's a lot to juggle there. That, and again, they don't all pay off. And the ones that do all pay off together in a story that, like, well, that makes me wonder if there was another way they could have gotten to the same end, dealing with what Hotel Oblivion is and was. I don't know if there is. I'm having a hard time thinking of one. I don't know if I would have gone this route for telling this story, because again, I don't know how you make people care about a mass prison break of all these ex-villains when we don't have a relationship with any of them.
Right. I mean, and so let me just say, I'm willing to give this book the benefit of the doubt, and I think I will probably like it more as I have some distance from it and return to it later. But this, like, a lot of what I'm complaining about here is what stopped me, what tripped me up when I started reading The Unwritten the first time. Lots of fractured storytelling.
Sure.
You know, in the first volume there, you start with this like Harry Potter type fantasy with these kids, and then you meet this character and his agent, and then there's this woman in the crowd, and then there's this vampire that seems like he's from the children's thing, but he's in the real world. And it just, every 2 or 3 pages, you're just changing who you're following, and you have to trust that they're going to tie it all together. Of course, Carrie and Gross do, and the book is perfect in so many ways. But that was still the same type of feeling where it was like, man, you're asking a lot of me to hang with this right now. And, you know, and they did it in volume 1. He's doing it in volume 3.
That's obviously that's the big difference there, is that's the opening gambit. You're saying, here are all the cards we're going to play, and we're going to lay them out there. And if you can follow this, you're going to be in. You know, like if you buy in that, it's a higher buy-in. But if you get over that initial curve, then you're in, pretty much for the long haul. To do that kind of storytelling in volume 3 it's unnecessary, because we're already into the characters. We're already into the world, you know? So that's why, in when I said that, I feel like it was them being a little too clever. It was like them looking back on Dallas on volume 2 and saying, well, look, we had a similar structure of, we separate our characters and we're all circling towards one goal, and we'll get everyone there, but how we do it that'll be the interesting part. You know, like, you know, with 5 and Allison going back through the commission, ending back in Dallas with Klaus and you know, Klaus dying, coming back to life, him and Luther and Diego, you know, digging up one of the agents using their time jumper thing. But they're going to end up too far back in Vietnam, and there's a way to do that, but all these fractured parts are all coming to one end, and it worked, and it was great. Look, let's do that again, but we'll be more, I don't know, obtuse about it. You know, we'll be more fractured, and when it comes together, people will be like, "Oh wow, do you see how that came together? Do you see how clever that was?" And I just don't think that worked, but I can understand. I feel like that was the mindset of like, well, we'll do a similar thing, but we'll make it more opaque. We'll make it harder to see. It won't be obvious, but they'll realize that all these different threads, they're actually all the same story, and we'll bring it all together at the end for a big finale. And I just don't think that works. It's like it's taking what worked in volume 2 and like not glomming onto the good parts of that. It was like glomming onto the bad parts of that structure and amplifying that. And I said it doesn't land to me in the same way. Because it's unnecessary to do it that, because again, you should be trading on the idea that we already have a relationship with these characters. We already have an understanding of the world. We already have some understanding of what the mechanics are within the family and within the characters. And I would have wanted them to lean more into that and less into just like another mission, because that's all this was. It was everyone on a different mission that, oh no, it was the same mission, and as opposed to focusing on
I don't even know what 1 and 2's mission was supposed to, what they thought they were doing, other than they went to get number 1 back in shape because he let himself go.
Yeah.
But it's like a lot of these characters didn't even have an objective of their own.
Yeah. It was like,
and then they just happened serendipitously.
They were doing things. Yeah.
Moving and rowing in the same direction.
Exactly. They were doing things. Well, and then again, someone like Klaus has nothing to do with anything. And he ends up there, not even part of the story. He's just brought there because, he's in a situation that forces his family to come to him. He's not even part of the story, not even accidentally. Nothing he has to do is relevant to the Hotel Oblivion part of the story. So yeah, again, I read it as it being like, we're going to do all these really, really, really disparate storylines and then bring it all together. And again, we're going to celebrate how clever we are, that I had this planned out the whole time, and to their credit, they didn't plan out the whole time. They obviously started this book with a plan of how it was going to come together and how it was going to end. So, kudos to that, for executing the plan that they set out. I think it was a wrong decision from the start.
Yeah. That being said, and I probably say this a bit of a cliche, but for me, but I still like that they took a swing, right? I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah.
I'm glad they didn't do another X-Men, another Avengers, another, even Black Hammer story. He's still trying to tell this his way.
Yeah.
And I think it was even going out on a ledge and saying, I'm going to try this differently than I did the first 2. Yeah. And I think you get points for trying.
I can buy that. I can live with that. No, I'm with you. I think we both said that before, that appreciate someone, appreciate when a team, when they try something. It doesn't always work. And I said, I don't think it works here.
But would you say it fails? I mean,
no. I don't think
that's my thing. It's like, as from the very beginning, I said, this is not. It's nothing in this book is bad. Yeah. But the part of it, the sum total of it, is a nothing burger, and I think that's just
it doesn't fail because it can't fail because it does coalesce. All those disparate threads do come together in a way that does actually make sense, and you can see how it was planned out. So I guess it does come down to maybe just personal taste in the story, and that all these threads connect, but because I didn't connect to those threads, if the same structure were in place, but it was telling a story that was just kind of more compatible to my mindset, or something that I enjoyed more, that I clicked with more, that I probably loved this. And I would be like, hey, look how cool all this came together. Look at how these different storylines, every different character doing their own thing, and all come together at the end. I do appreciate that. So the behind the scenes mechanics, I can applaud. But because I didn't connect with this specific story, for me is what downgrades it, because I just didn't care about, like, anytime they cut back to the two villains who were escaping with the baby, like, even rereading it now, it's like I don't care about this.
Right. Unless that baby's the main character in the next book. I don't really care.
But I think the only thing that was supposed to be was so Allison can come in and be the one to talk to the mother of this, and have that connection of potential lost daughter mother thing that she has, so I think it's meant to be a parallel. So I think it's only set up so she can come in and have that moment of connection with this other character, a character, again, we only just met, have no idea who she is, what her deal is, what her motivation is, just that she wants her baby back. That's it. So I can't see how that has any relevant. I mean, maybe it does. I'm not going to put anything past them, but based on what we can read here, all that specific setup with the baby and all that was just so Allison could have that moment of, I don't know, not redemption or anything, but just she could have that moment to confront this thing about herself that maybe she's shying away from. She can confront it in someone else, and that's the only reason it's there. Again, as far as I can tell. So, but we don't care about those characters, and I don't want to see Allison make that connection with a character I don't know anything about. If we had some investment in that, there'd be a bigger payoff, or just follow Allison down her own road, which they started with her own daughter, with her actual family, the people she's actually estranged from, as opposed to giving it this surrogate of these characters that were just introduced.
Right. Yeah. And it goes back to, I see what you're going for.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad it worked.
I think you missed.
I think you missed.
Yeah.
I'm glad so many people liked it. Because genuinely, and like I'm looking at the Goodreads reviews, not that that's always the best barometer, but generally people liked it, and that made me think, like, if somebody makes me a really great eggplant parmesan and they just do it, just like you would in Italy, and it's perfect, it doesn't change the fact that I don't like eggplant. Right? Like, it's just
sure.
I'm like, and I'll be polite and I'll try it and I'll eat it and I'll really try to see what, what's admirable about it, what's good about it. But at the end of the day, it's just not my flavor. And I think this one was just not my flavor.
Yeah, I think I agree.
And that's not to disparage anyone who worked on it and I certainly wouldn't, like, this doesn't pull me out of the series. Like, when Volume 4 comes out, I'm in.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I think, I think we're on the same page in that the thing we liked most about this volume was the things it set up potentially for Volume 4, like the things that they actually did set in motion. Because I don't think the stuff with the villains and Hotel Oblivion, I think that story is done, and it's clear that the stuff with the Sparrows, and it's like you said, what's the next page after the two teams meet and the new number one says his name and he says his name is number one. What does that mean? What happens after that page? That's far more interesting than what we just read. So, I'm not out on the book, because what they've set up, I think, is potentially really, really cool. So I really want Volume 4 to come out.
This style of storytelling out of their system.
I hope so too. Yeah. And I hope it's focused more, not that it has to be more linear, or more cohesive.
Right. I prefer linear, but scrambled storytelling is in, just like horror is in, and all these other tropes.
I would like, aside from story mechanics, I would like it more character focused. Yes. And I think one. Yeah, exactly. And I think by introducing the Sparrows, if it's going the way that it seems to go, and that's taking context clues from the little bit we saw in Volume 3, and also I think maybe some clues from the Netflix show, which we won't get into here, but by focusing on this other group, I think it's a way to focus in on our main characters as well, and then it becomes more character focused by nature, because hopefully they'll spend time to look into who the Sparrows are and what they can do as a way, as a reflection of, again, I think you talked about how they, at least for now, they seem relatively well adjusted. Whether that's because they had better upbringing or better parents, or because the Umbrella Academy is so dysfunctional that anything not that seems normal or seems quote unquote normal, or so.
But I think
by being a mirror, you can look at both sides.
Right, and I think the thing that would, I'm careful to say this because they might do it, and they might do it well. The thing for me that would suck is if Volume 4 is a muckraking, and it's like, we're going to strip the varnish off the Sparrows. We're going to show how they really do have deep-seated trauma and make them as ineffective as us. And I could very realistically see comics doing that.
Oh yeah. But so I think that'd be fine, but you'd have to start by building them up, So
right, you have to show how they're the golden era comic goody good two shoes heroes that make our traumatized, broken people feel inferior.
Yeah. So so this arc, whatever reason, was 7 issues, but the first 2 were 6 issues. So in 6 or 7 issues, you would have to build them up to show how they are better, and then break them back down to show them how they're the same. If they were to go that route, that it not all as rosy as it seems, and that maybe the dysfunction and that kind of mental trauma or whatnot is just inherent for these people, for these special kids that were born that day. That could absolutely be a storyline they go down. But and again, not saying that would be bad, but they would have to do that relatively quickly. You'd have to establish very quickly them as being great, and then tear them down. You can't just start by doing that, So you have to spend the time to get invested in these new characters, showing how wonderful they are, and both in the eyes to the reader and both for the Umbrella Academy. They have to look at them and be like, wow, these guys, they got their stuff together.
We need number one to feel so inferior to the other number one.
Yeah.
That either he realizes, I think the way to tell the story is to say, like, okay, well, these guys are like goody good two shoes. They function perfectly as a team, whatever, but there's something wrong with what they're doing, where they're blindly following orders of a crazy person. So we have to stop them. And they realize, like, okay, well, their number one's better than our number one. Their number two is better than our number two. Yeah. Their number three is better than our number three. Yeah. But the 1 through 6 of us, when we're together, are better than the sum of their parts.
Sure.
And I think that's an awesome story to tell. Yeah. And I'm not sure anything like that exactly has been done. There's been a lot of close, similar things. And, and any good villain in comics is usually some kind of inverse of the character. Or they challenge some inherent weakness or some insecurity in the character. And this is doing all of that.
Which then forces them to face it and overcome it. And thus become, better.
And what will you do to clear that obstacle? That's the Sorkin intention obstacle.
No, I think but again, this is all speculation on a hypothetical volume 4 that has been announced, but as far as I know, there's been no movement on, and we're going on 3 years.
And Dark Horse wants it. Like, Dark Horse has to want it because it's like one of the biggest properties they have.
Well, and as of recording right now, we're early part of 2023. Filming for the 4th and final season of the Netflix show, season 4, began earlier this year in 2023. So the presumption is that it would probably show up sometime in 2024. Maybe spring, early summer, something like that. But sometime in 2024, I think you can expect the final season of the Umbrella Academy to drop on Netflix. And I think you're right. Dark Horse would love if they could be like, volume 4, season 4 is coming, and look at this, unrelated or not, but there's a new comic we're coming at, and maybe the fact that there is a Free Comic Book Day story this year in 2023, that's an Umbrella Academy story, that I'm going to make sure to go and pick up. I want to have that because I got all the other issues. Maybe that's a hint that they are working on it again. But there's no doubt that if there could be some sort of synergy of whether volume 4 is the last volume of the comic or not, just to have that out or be in the ether of this is coming and it'll be out. So there's some cross promotion with the final season of the show. I'm sure they would love that. But again, I have no idea where they would be in the creative process. Because again, as far as I know, it was the Free Comic Book Day story that's coming out in 2023. Like, that's the first news of the Umbrella Academy comic since Hotel Oblivion ended. And
pre-pandemic.
In 2019. And then, so I guess it was then in 2020, a year after after Hotel Oblivion ended is they announced that there would be a volume 4. So that was in 2020, I believe, when they announced Sparrow Academy. So there hasn't been any other movement. Like there are no updates of like, yeah, we're working on it, things like that, blah, 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 as far as I know. So if there could be some sort of synergy where they can match up, that would be awesome. I would love it. And said I would immediately subscribe to it and get it on my pull list so I could read it day of as soon as it's out. But until I actually see a solicitation, I'm not gonna get my hopes up.
Yeah, and I think you just have to be happy with what you have.
Yeah,
and frankly, I've had a lot of fun talking about what that last page means. I just thought it was a grind to get there.
Definitely.
And so it's like for a book club podcast,
do you think it was worth? I mean, do you think what we got was worth that last page? Because in my mind, I don't think it was. I think there's probably other versions of this kind of story that would have felt better for me. As much as I like the ending and like that last page and what it could represent, I don't think the read, like this isn't one that I reread, because I don't think going through it again is worth that last page. Where do you stand on that? Is this book you're going to go back and read through again and revisit? Because I do Dallas all the time, but Hotel Oblivion is not on that list for me.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I read it twice.
Yeah,
and I thought it was 50% better at least the second time through, because I knew what the anchor was for everything.
Sure. Okay.
So I do think it gets better on reread. I think if they return to close the loop on a lot of these individual stories in volume 4 that doesn't exist and probably won't exist. But if volume 4 comes back and they pick up something important that happened on that space journey for 1 and 2, and if they pick up some other job that 5 picked up on his quest in this one, that could all feel more coherent. But again, that goes back to my case for why the next one should be 8 through 14 of Hotel Oblivion. If all of these things are continuing, right, then you're not starting a new miniseries. You're just doing, but whatever. That it's semantics. What I would love to see.
But you think there's a path where retroactively, like if they went back and did those things with 5 and Diego and Luther,
I think things have become better. Like that would not be the first time in comics or movie or whatever history where something gets better retroactively.
Without being a direct retcon. You're saying like they could decide to go back and
they put something in a new context.
They could pay off a little more what Klaus was doing. They could go back to Allison and her ex-husband. They could just revisit those things. And then when you look at the story as a whole, you then gloss over the kind of the blip that is 3, and you get to the resolution in 4. And so it colors you looking back. I could see that.
I mean, the most recent one
too. I would hope for it as well.
The most recent example that I'm thinking of, which I think didn't actually pan out to be anything. I'm sure you remember in Tom King's Batman, I believe it was issue 38, the one-shot story, like the secret origin of Bruce Wayne about that kid.
Oh, yeah.
Then in Tynion's run, he introduced a few new villains, and one of them was the designer. And issue 38 or whatever shot up in price because people were like, oh, he's making that issue 38 the origin story for a new villain. Yeah. It wasn't.
No.
And speculators lost a lot of money, I hope. Yeah. But
people also thought that character was Punchline.
They just so desperate for a payoff.
Yeah.
And I think it already served its full purpose for Tom King.
Oh, it did, yeah.
There are little threads like that that writers, especially in ongoing things, have thrown out, and somebody else can go harvest later. I would love it. I would love it if Chip Zdarsky did something to pick up that, or like Mr. Bloom from the New 52 run, all kinds of stuff that's just left out there. So all of that to say, it can be done just because you left a lot of stuff on the table.
Yeah.
You can then go make what I forget, the like kitchen sink soup or something where you just take all the ingredients left in the fridge and put it into a pot and add some spices, and eventually you're going to come up with something good. And I think he's left a lot of raw material on the table here. it just didn't come together as a tidy dish at the end like the first two did.
I know. I agree. And although I get the sense, though, not that he has everything written out, Gerard Way, in this case, but I do have a sense that as he was writing this, he already knows what he wants or wanted to do in volume 4. You know, again, that's why beyond just introducing the sparrows, I think he already knows which threads he wants to pick up and are going to carry over. So it's entirely possible that the things that we're talking about, the threads that we'd like to see him go back to, like, he doesn't deem important, you know, because in his mind, he's already kind of written what the overall story arc is going to be and what he wants these characters to do. Because I get a sense that he thinks in that way. Otherwise, he's not introducing these things 1, 2, 3 volumes ahead, you know?
Right.
You know, because I said there were things I mentioned in volume 1. In volume 1, there was a mention of both Dallas in 1963 that 5 mentions, and Luther specifically mentions the hotel, you know, that so-and-so couldn't escape the hotel. Father said so. So that idea of what Hotel Oblivion is, I'm sure was already in his mind. Now, whether it was this specific story, it's going to come back to it, it's going to be Breakout, whatever it is, don't know. But that element of the world was already there. So I have to imagine the idea of the Sparrow Academy or these other kids has been knocking around for him for a while. He's thought about that, you know? So he already has a general plan, I have to assume, of what volume 4 is going to be. And it's entirely possible that things that we would like to see him pick up that maybe retroactively help volume 3, they don't actually get picked up. And he goes in a different direction. And those things are left unexplored because they aren't of concern to the creative team. So, you know, that's a possibility. You know, it's always on the table.
Well, that sums up our thoughts on volume 3, Hotel Oblivion, from the Umbrella Academy. If volume 4 ever exists, you can trust us to read it right away, pick it up, and be ready to discuss it here again. But in the meantime, thank you for listening to us. Please find us on Twitter and storiedarcs.com. Share us with a friend. We don't want any of your money. We don't do any sponsorships, anything like that. Just share us with a friend. Keep reading. Keep going to comic shops. Use your public library. And join us for discussion. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.
Peace.